Welcome to Higher Learning. I am your host, Oz Rashid. This is more than just a podcast. It's a front row seat to how elite leaders build the most iconic of teams. The kind of leaders who spot potential that others overlook, who build cultures people don't want to leave, who set the bar, then raise it. Work and how we work is evolving at a rapid pace like no time in history. Our guests will give you insights on how to stay out in front when it comes to all things talent, leadership, management, artificial intelligence, and developing the skills that actually matter. Whether you're a founder, hiring manager, or just obsessed with building teams the right way, this is your spot. If it's your first time here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button, drop a rating, tell a friend who gets it. To our longtime listeners, we appreciate you. Thanks for the continued support. Now, let's get into it. All right, listeners. Every leader says they run towards hard problems. My next guest actually built her career doing it. Dr. Lilicia Bailey started in psychology at Spelman before she ever touched HR, and that lens never left her. She spent her first decade in corporate life building global people functions at Cox Enterprises, then walked into Belk and rebuilt its entire culture and engagement function from scratch. In 2016, she made a decision most people don't make on purpose. She left retail for healthcare. She had no idea the timing would turn into a trial by fire. She led people strategy through the hardest stretch the healthcare workforce has ever lived through, first at Wake Forest Baptist, then as the chief people officer at Emory Healthcare, right through the pandemic and the staffing crisis that followed it. And here's the part that gets me. While she was living through all of that, she went back to school and earned her PhD, writing her dissertation on how leaders navigate exactly the kind of chaos she was managing in real time. She wasn't just studying the theory, she was living it. Today, she's the senior executive vice president and chief people officer at CommonSpirit Health, one of the largest nonprofit health systems in the country, setting the tone for how tens of thousands of caregivers show up to work every day. Please welcome to Dr. Lilicia Bailey. Dr. Bailey, how you doing?
I'm doing fantastic today. Thank you for asking.
You got it. How was that intro? Okay.
That was perfect. Spot on.
I loved it. I love it. I love that you're here. I appreciate you coming on. I'm so excited to talk a little bit about you and your career. I want to start where I start most of my podcasts because I love to understand the career journey. It's really interesting to me, and I'm very curious to always hear. So you are, as we just described, the senior EVP and chief people officer at CommonSpirit Health. But how did you first get into HR? Was this an intentional path, or was this something you fell into? I know you started with psychology, but I'm just really interested how you kind of moved into this space.
I would say probably because I'm very curious. And so studying psychology gave me the lens of understanding organizations and how organizations work and decisions that people make. But it was too far downstream. By the time you start to look at organizational psychology, stuff has already happened, and we're trying to fix the stuff that has happened. So I became curious around, well, where do these decisions get made, and what's the construct by which organizations work? And so that's kind of how I fell into HR, because HR was putting together organizational effectiveness and culture and the intersection of leadership. And that's kind of how my pathway landed me in human resources.
So was it love at first sight, or did it take you a little while to kind of get used to all the different things that happen in an HR function?
It was not love at first sight. It was kind of a awakening that HR, there were jokes about HR, there were Dilbert cartoons about HR, that HR was not loved and was viewed more as a necessary evil versus a contributor. And so that was a hard pill to swallow. But my attitude was, I'm going to make it different, and I'm going to change the narrative and the directive around how HR is viewed.
I really love that. I mean, listen, in any vocation, in any function, you're going to have some people that do it like what I would consider the right way, and some people that maybe go about it the wrong way. We're going to see that across anything. And I started MSH back in 2011 with this thought process that talent in HR is not this back of office function that's keep the lights on. That's not this like just compliance and hand slapping or wrist slapping type function that only when you get in trouble, or employee relations or whatever, there's some tactical HR, and that's very necessary for any business to be able to thrive. Don't get me wrong, but there's the strategic aspect of HR that really excites me. How do we attract, develop, and retain our employee base? How do we build a culture that makes people excited to come to work? And that's primarily important in the healthcare space with everything you've got going on and all the fire drills and the sick people and the doctors and the nurses and all the personnel. So I'm just interested as you made that kind of transition from retail into healthcare. I want to know about Common Spirit though, because I talked a little bit about the nonprofit and how it's getting people to understand how they show up. But you've had such a long history in healthcare now. What drew you to this organization specifically? What was really enticing about this role in this organization?
Yeah, I'll have to take one step back. So I actually worked in 5 different industries. We didn't talk about all 5, but I've had experience in multiple industries. And what was most appealing to me related to Common Spirit was the intersection of mission, vision, values, and making a huge contribution in the lives of people. Health really matters to people, and that oftentimes you're seeing people when they're at their most vulnerable moments, and taking all of the lessons that I've learned in other industries and looking at healthcare being a little bit further behind in terms of adoption of practices that may have been in place for a while. And so with Common Spirit, my first interview was with the CEO, and I remember the backdrop of the Zoom screen, and it had the values. And I was very intrigued by that. One, because the CEO had the values of the organization as the backdrop. And then I became a little bit skeptical about, yeah. People like to put values on a piece of paper, but are they really living them? And I saw example after example manifested where the values were front and center, and really focused on purpose and the mission of the organization. The second thing that drew me to Common Spirit was the size. It's complex. It's geographically diverse. There's 160,000 people, and not only just the people who are employed, but the people the lives that we touch. And it was just a huge opportunity to bring to bear all the things that I had learned and studied and as a practitioner, and to work in an organization that was mission driven, values front and center, and the appetite and willingness to lean in to culture and change.
You always hear when people show you who they are, believe them. And it's a lot of times said with a negative connotation. But I think in this instance, it's a positive connotation for the CEO to be so early on in the interviewing process with you, with the values behind them, right? Had to say a lot to you about how HR is valued at this organization, how they look at it as a conduit for the mission, for the values, and how that drives out the rest of the organization. That had to feel really good and kind of hopefully was validated throughout the rest of the interview process. And it sounds like ever since you joined, you've only seen that validated day in and day out again. Is that true?
Absolutely. I actually say when people show you who they are, believe them the first time.
Believe in the first time. That's great advice. So let's talk about leadership because like it's a key to any great team, any great organization, any great group. And particularly in healthcare and hospital organizations, I think it really permeates patient care and delivery of patient care and how people feel coming to work. What makes a good leader to you? I'm interested. I'm like, you've seen this throughout your career in all these different industries, like you mentioned. What makes a great leader to you in healthcare?
Yeah. I think healthcare has a little bit of uniqueness given the multidimensional aspects of people interfacing that leaders have to do in healthcare. I would probably drill it down to something that I look at as really about perspective.
Mm,
And when I say perspective, as people grow in their career, you get less and less removed from the real body of work. And by the time you become a senior leader, whether you're at the C suite or you're at the hospital, there are layers and layers and layers of people in between you and the actual touching of the customer, the community, whatever body of work that you have responsibility for. So having perspective is really important, and people will filter and give you what they think you want to know. There are oftentimes things that you need to know, but you don't necessarily know. And if you're not open and welcoming for conversation, then you're not going to know those things. So I would say listening is a key aspect of leadership and perspective. And when I think about listening, I think about listening in different ways. One, listening with your ears, obviously, but also listening with your eyes. What do you see as you're listening and hearing what people are saying? I think the second part is asking great questions, not
mm.
the usual questions, but really figuring out what those probing questions are. What are the things that you need to ask so that you have the perspective that you need from the leaders? And I also think that um, leadership comes in many. at many levels, and being with the people and asking those questions, being open where people see you as receptive to wanting to hear without retribution is another key aspect of the multidimensional way that leaders need to lead in healthcare and in any other organization as well.
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite books by Simon Sinek is Leaders Eat Last. And this idea of service-based leadership to me, like it's funny because we have an organization that's been around for 16 years now. And you find that we have some people that come in early in their career and their belief is that, well, I've got to be a manager to be able to reach my career goals. I've got to have that title. And then they get into the job and they realize, actually, I don't enjoy this at all. And
Mhm.
I tell people, being a leader is not a title, it's a responsibility. And the
Yes.
reality of it is, and this is probably the truth in almost every situation, you're probably going to make less money and have way more heartache and way more headaches with all the things that you have to deal with because you absolutely have to be in service of the people below you. It has to be about them. It can't be about you. And we've all seen leaders that get that turned around. And I think that's a big
Mhm.
problem. And I think another big thing, and we talked about this in one of our earlier conversations, is self-awareness, right?
Yes.
Having the self-awareness as a leader, on, are you hitting the right notes? Are you reaching your audience? Are you picking the right timing to communicate things, both written and verbally? Are you living by example? This understanding of how you're presenting yourself at any given time. We tell people in our company, in our management training, that you get a megaphone, right? Every time you become a manager or a leader in the company, you get fire every time you do it. And you can use that to light the way, or you can use that to burn somebody. When you say something, whether you like it or not, that's magnified. And everybody looks at that a different way when you're a manager and a leader. And so that understanding of that self-awareness, I
Mhm.
think, is so key. I'm just interested. Do you have any examples of great leaders being self-aware and what it's meant for their team?
Yeah, let's see. A great leader with self-awareness, I would say I have learned from a leader who I would say amplified self-awareness by being willing to solicit feedback first and foremost. So asking the question, sometimes it came in one-on-one, sometimes it came in roundtable conversations or fireside chats where he would show up as the leader to start to give information out to others, but really was taking the information in and was asking questions really about his leadership style and what types of behaviors or things he did that were instrumental in helping people to do their work, what types of things that he said or did that were limiting. So, for example, this one leader used to use this term, one throat to choke. And he used it from a sense of, accountability. This is not the common spirit leader, by the way, but this is earlier in my career. He used it from an accountability standpoint of who's accountable for this action, but did not realize that that was his behavior. Like he was out hunting for people who were going to, and sometimes people would get terminated. And so the self awareness was the lack of awareness, basically, that that comment reverberated throughout the organization, and other people would use that same terminology, and it was creating a culture of fear. And so the behavior was to take a pause and ask for feedback from team members, and then also being willing to have vulnerability to say, I did not realize that some of the behaviors that I have either shut down conversations. I was always the first to speak in a meeting, but through his asking of questions and his 360, he really took that to heart and began to know self in a way that he was vulnerable and sharing it with others and then taking action to be different and to be better. And the other thing that I found with that self awareness is it created a culture among the other leaders of self awareness. It began to model what does self aware leaders look like, and then asking those questions began to go from his level to the next level to the next level. And we started to create this culture of trust and transparency that was a great benefit from that leader's self awareness.
What a fantastic answer. There's a couple of different things that stand out to me about those comments. The first thing is, not only asking for feedback as a leader, right, is important, but being authentic in the way that you do it and genuinely wanting that feedback, I think is key. Because people are naturally, especially if you're a CEO, founder, CHRO, whatever kind of C-level title you have, people are naturally not going to want to be sharing negative feedback with somebody in fear of retribution or in fear of saying the wrong thing and angering somebody, right? So I found that, I try to do it in one-on-one situations and I ask it repeatedly and ask people to like unspool the thread to really pull things out. And even then, sometimes I feel like I get manufactured answers. So as a leader, it's really incumbent upon you to genuinely and authentically go and seek that out time and time again, because that it's otherwise you've got an emperor's new clothes situation. But
Absolutely.
you're not knowing what is you're doing and how things are coming across. I think it's really important. And then the other thing is like about the one neck to choke, the power of words. Like I'm a big believer that ultimately, if you um choose the right words, the right tone, know your audience, you can say pretty much anything to anybody. For example, if somebody's coming in late to a meeting repeatedly and you slam down and stop the meeting and say, "Oh, you're so selfish and you always show up late." Guess what happens? The person doesn't hear the lesson. They just hear how you talk to them. And now you've made it about something other than giving them the feedback to help them get better. But if you wait till the end of the meeting, pull them aside and say, "Hey, listen, when you do this, it impacts other people's time. It makes us feel like you don't value our time and respect our time. So even if you're going to be a little bit late, if you could just communicate and let us know so we can go ahead and get started, that would change things for the better." I really, really put a lot of thought and intention. I'm not 100% perfect with it around choosing the right words and the right tone and the right time. Because you're right, your words carry really, really strong emphasis and intensity when you have that leadership title. And even when you're just using things that you might have been saying all your way up throughout your career, they all of a sudden take on a new dynamic as you become a leader, right?
And sometimes when you hear those words back, you're like, I didn't know it had that impact, because the interpretation by the time it reverberates through the organization could be totally different than what you actually attended.
Totally agree. Now, I know this wouldn't be common spirit, but I have to imagine you've been in some forms of hospitals or healthcare organizations where there has been less than ideal leadership. And what I want to, rather than have you badmouth or name any names, I'm just interested. How does that permeate an organization? Does that actually go all the way down in terms of patient care? Do patients feel that? Like, how does that manifest itself in a healthcare organization?
Yeah, it does. You think about poor leadership, the practices that poor leaders put in place do have an impact. Poor decisions, but I would say most importantly, it impacts the culture. There's this interesting. Some of your viewers may remember this experiment that they had with the monkeys in the cage, and it was really about culture. And the manifestation of culture is hard to put your hands on culture, but you can definitely see the impact of a bad culture on whether it's the patient experience, it's the interface with the community, it's the interface with all of your team members. And so poor leadership, in my experiences, translates also into the culture of what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And then it gets translated even to bottom line results, the business results. When you're looking at why is my strategy not working, is because you don't have a good culture. You may not have the right leaders in place. But I would say because leaders carry such a loud voice, that it is important to recognize early when there is poor leadership so that it can be rectified, and also to give agency to organizations where people can speak up, particularly in healthcare. If something is going on that's not right, you want someone to stop the line, raise their hand, and cause a pause, a heart stop, so that we can identify what's going wrong and then get rectified. And great cultures encourage that and reward that behavior versus letting it go on and on. And sometimes when you have leaders that are acting poorly, the decision maker to take that leader out is oblivious to that until it's gone on for a while. But the impact to the people, whether it's the customer, the patient, the community, the team member, is great.
100%. And like, let's use an example of a restaurant. Because it's more open and you can kind of see the servers interacting with each other and you can watch them going back into the kitchen. You can feel we've been in restaurants where it's like you can feel like the experience, like people are running around and it's chaotic and maybe there's people yelling and stuff in the background, and that permeates to the guest and their experience. Conversely, when you have one that's a well-oiled machine and the people are happy and they feel like they're good to show up to work, you feel that too, right? And that permeates everything. Like you said, customers, patients, communities, you feel that. And that's why Richard Branson like says, I'm going to treat our employees number one and then customers number two. And the reason is because if we take care of the employees, then they're going to take care of our customers. And I deeply believe that. Now, let's say that I'm walking into a hospital right now, or I'm working into a healthcare organization right now, and then I'm a patient. What does a good culture feel like? Like, what is it? What are you seeing? What are the things to kind of check for that and kind of get a feel for that when you walk into an organization
Yeah,
like that?
sometimes it's a feel. It's not just the look; it's the feel. The people there are inviting, they're warm, they're really demonstrating. And at Common Spirit, we really talk about human kindness at every touch point, how you greet
Mhm.
someone, how you even acknowledge someone who may look like they're lost. It may not be your job, but you stop what you're doing and you go and help give them guidance and direction to help get their needs met. It's really treating people with, I would say, that human kindness notion. And that's where people will want to come back. They'll feel like they're getting the best care. You want people to feel like they are a visitor and they feel warm when they come into your environment, not as that they're troublesome or they're bothering you. I think that's really important, and you can almost feel it. You can go into an environment and you can feel it when something is toxic and you have your team members who are actually telling your patients or telling their families what they don't like about their role, that's a bit toxic. And it's not the environment. And it's not easy because many of our larger health systems have lots of care sites that you try to create that environment everywhere. But I think it has to not just be from a leadership perspective, it has to be invasive throughout all the things that you do with every team member.
Well, let me ask you that. What if you overheard one of the employees like complaining, saying something like that? What would be the conversation you have with them? How would you kind of articulate to them, this is why you can't do that?
Yeah, want to, find out from them what is it that they are uncomfortable about that they're sharing. Why did they not feel like they have the internal mechanism to go and have that discussion if they feel like they're not heard or what have you? And then I would also, the flip side, show them why that is not the way that we would operate within our ministry. We want to operate differently, that we can resolve things when we bring things to bear to solve for the problem. And if they don't feel like that's being handled in the one-on-one situation, that they have other channels that they can come and have the discussion. Our survey, our engagement survey of 160,000 people, we get about 90% participation. And within that participation, we continue to ask those probing questions that help us to understand where there may be gaps. And then we don't sit there. We work with every leader who actually has the responsibility to work with their teams so that there's a two-way communication and two-way feedback so that that employee doesn't feel like they have to share their concerns. But it happens it happened a lot in retail and it happened in other industries when I was in media. And so being mindful of that going on and having the discussion with the team members so that they can learn and understand how to their concerns addressed internally.
What a fantastically layered answer. People are learning so much from this podcast. That's amazing. I appreciate you sharing that. We talked about leadership. We've talked about culture. Now let's talk about how we bring the right people into the organization, those mission driven people, right? And that's what pays the bills here at the old Higher Learning. These lights don't keep
That's
themselves on.
right.
So let's get into the
Let's
hiring
do it.
questions. Here's what I want to ask you starting off here. Just do you have and maybe this is something that's traveled with you as you've joined and been in other organizations or different industries, or if maybe it's something that over time you've really kind of built. But what is a core hiring philosophy if you had to kind of break it down for me, for you personally, whether it be you hiring for your own personal team or maybe how you would advise your organization?
Yeah, I think what's important, when you start to look at hire, there's some roles that the skill set is important. You're going to figure out if they have the technical skill, but it's also how are they going to amplify the culture that we want? How are they going to work within the organization? What contributions can they make based on their past? And then also the willingness to learn and grow with our organization. So I think part of it is the first layer is you have the technical skill set for the job that you're applying for, or if they're earlier in their career, do they have the appetite, something that will show us they have the appetite to learn and to grow. But I think what really matters beyond that aspect of technical skill set is the culture. You're bringing people into the organization and they have to have the right mindset. So I love doing structured interview questions, behavioral interview questions to try to understand what's the past behavior and how they've handled situations is very telling. and then how we would then overlay that. How would they handle these types of situations within our organization?
Okay. And now, like, listen, there's been a theme, I think, from both your own career and from what you're looking for in terms of curiosity and growth mindset and learning. How do you know if somebody has that in an interview or not? Is it a way that they carry themselves? Is it the questions they ask? Do you ask something specific to maybe find and tease that out of them?
I think it's kind of the questions, like looking at their background and asking questions around how they made decisions when they had challenging situations. How did they make that decision? Looking to see if they are able to navigate change and have change agility. And so I think it's the questions that are designed to ask to tease that out. But then in addition, you learn a lot when people allow them to ask questions to kind of see what questions they ask. Did they really give critical thought, or did they say, what keeps you up at night?
We've all heard that one time and time again. That's the most cliche. Tell me your biggest weakness. Oh, I'm too perfect. Um, do you have a favorite question that maybe is a go-to, or is it unique person to person?
I think it's unique to the role and to person. I don't think I have a particular question I would say is my favorite.
Got it. I Let's talk about self-awareness because we talked about how important that is in a leader. And I struggled. You can kind of tell somebody who's got self-awareness or not in an interview process by the way that maybe they're rambling a lot, or maybe they pull themselves back, or maybe they don't directly answer the question, right? And things like that. I think those are cues. But I actually like to really get to the heart of it. A question that I've asked before to identify self-awareness is, tell me a common misconception about you and who the real you is. And I think that's a great way to kind of get people
I
to
like
either
that.
look internally, right, and say, yeah, here's some things that people have thought about me, but here's the real me. And then I think it also gives them an opportunity to, something that's maybe we've all had that. We've all had things that people assume about us coming in. They're judging a book by its cover, but this is who the real me is. I think that when I get a really great answer there, I think I have a good sense of their self awareness. And then sometimes I get people that are just kind of vague and ambiguous with their answer. And then I'm not so sure. What do you think
I
about that
like
one?
that because I actually think it gives the person an opportunity to show their authenticity. Who are they really?
Mhm.
And it also does tell you if they're self-aware, because if they feel like it's a trick question and they respond to it in this kind of gloss over, then you know a lot that they may not have that. So, they say that, 70% of people who think about self-awareness are not necessarily self-aware.
That's an interesting statistic. Okay, I like that. Okay, what about a memorable interview experience? It could be a really great one you had. It could be maybe a something crazy happened in the interview. Maybe you were interviewing somebody. Maybe you were interviewing at a different company. Can you give us any kind of memorable interview experiences that come to mind?
I think of a situational interview. I remember I was interviewing, and I was, it was a panel and it was pretty tough panel interview, and they were asking me a situational question around how would you handle this, that, or the other, when I was talking things that I had done in the past. And we paused the interview, and the leader decided to take me on a tour to experience the environment. And I was right in the midst of the environment with the people, with the um, environmental service team members. And so it was almost like a live, okay, you said it. Now let's see how you do it, with no prep. Did not know I was going to go on a walking tour and be put in the middle of this focus group. And so, one, I was happy that I told the truth and that I knew what I was saying. But that was probably the most unique experience.
What did you think about that? How was that for you as a candidate experience? It probably threw you off a little bit initially, but did you see the value in it? Did that feel like something that was a good
I saw the value because it
idea?
also told me a little bit about the culture, the spontaneity. I think they had interviewed a lot of candidates and they were tired of the rhetoric, and really wanted to see if there's proof in the pudding here. So it was a different experience. Would I replicate it? Maybe.
Okay. I like that. That's pretty good. I might have to use that. We might have to do a walking tour right here about in the middle of an interview. We'll see how they handle that. What about communicating kind of what it's like to work with you, or what it's like to work in your company, or what the not so great things about the role in the organization would be? How much of that do you share during an interview process to give a realistic job preview versus selling somebody on the role and getting them excited?
Yeah, I think that I love what you just said about the realistic job preview, and I bet you do that often with your line of business. I think that's exceptionally important. My first career job role was with Home Depot, and I remember the creation of the job preview. And it really helped for people to deselect and just say, I'm not interested. And you rather have them to deselect when they really see the reality. So there was a video that was created to show, you might be doing this work, but here's the other things that you're going to need to do. And then there were people who just said not interested and never went forward in the process. So I think that's very helpful. I also know that within that first 90 days, it's really important after someone is hired. That's when they really make that decision. Did I make a good decision or not? And within that first 6 months, people leave. They come in, they're excited. The excitement wears off, and then in 6 months, you've lost that great talent. But if you can have the realistic job preview on the front end, it helps people to deselect as needed. And then just the other part of that is within that first year, where we really monitor our turnover, really pay attention to the experiences that the person has to see that there's not disingenuous or a cognitive disconnect.
For sure. And like I love like the timelines you give because number one, we all know that a great onboarding experience, a great training experience, if that's there, you're much more likely to have somebody stay beyond a year or two within the organization. So that's 100% correct. And that's why you want to not only think about your interview process, but kind of onboarding in that transition process. But it's like we've heard many times of people offering money to have people willingly resign and leave, or checking in at 30 days and seeing where people are. Because you're right. Sometimes like people will take a job because they need a job, and that's not a bad thing. But then that means that when the right job comes about, they're probably going to leave, right? If this is not the right fit for them. And that's really what it comes down to is this idea of fit. And to your point, if somebody's self-selecting out early in the process, gosh, you just save yourself a bunch of time, a bunch of money, a bunch of opportunity
Mm,
cost, right, to do
absolutely.
that. So I'm totally with you. I think it's you want to balance it a little bit, but like I think a video that says, "Hey, here's the things that's not all puppy dogs and lollipops about the organization and what we're doing, but here's why you're coming in, and this is why we see you being a potential." But feel free to self-select because there's going to be hard work tied to this and X, Y, Z. These are our
Mhm.
expectations. I think the sooner you can identify that stuff, the better, because it doesn't do anybody any justice to have a job that they don't love, that they're not a great fit for, that's not a fit for them, and vice versa, obviously for the company. So I totally think that's the right thing. What about, we all get it wrong sometimes, right? When it comes to hiring, right? And so I'm just interested, are there any things that you've learned throughout your careers, or maybe biases that you had early on in your career that you had to learn from, or that you're still learning from in terms of, when you get it wrong, was there maybe a theme there?
Mm. That's a great question. I think one theme that I learned is just because what you see on paper, or if so on their resume or their CV, or the way that someone interviews does not mean that because there are people who are great in an interview. They are charismatic. You love them. They talk a good game, and they get there and it's like, oh my, this is not what I thought it was going to be. And so I think really seeing beyond some of that, to be able to decipher what is really the essence of this individual coming into this role. And sometimes you have different tools or different ways of seeing that. I also think that the main thing is when you figure out that you did not do it right, do it quick. Be swift about it. Don't opine. Don't think about it for the next 18 months. Move on. Make a decision and say that figure out if this is not working out. And I think sometimes people hold on too long beyond, and there's residual impact, negative impact when sometimes you hold on too long to the wrong person.
Yeah, listen, this sounds harsh, but I've told people in our organization that put an invite on your calendar 30 days after they've joined. And then ask yourself, knowing what you know now, would you rehire this person and run to rehire them or not? And if not, doesn't mean you necessarily have to take action on that, but you should really be thinking deeply about why that is the case. Because after 30 days, it's kind of you can fake your way through an interview process. You can be all talk and no action and then get hired. But once you start working with somebody day to day, week to week, and you start to see how they operate and things like that, you get a pretty good sense. And like you said, you think you're being nice, right? But you're actually really kind of keeping that person trapped as well too, right? So I've seen some situations where it can turn around, but for the most part, people are going to be people at the end of the day, and the fit is either there usually right away or not. I would tell you all the exceptional hires I've ever made throughout my career. I knew they were exceptional 30 days in. I knew I was like, oh, we got this
Nailed
one
it.
right. Right? So that's a great
Yeah.
feeling, right? So and we know how that feels. So conversely, if you're not feeling that way, you gotta interrogate that a little bit. And you gotta, and like you said, You got to have that hard conversation and that difficult action, even if it doesn't feel
Yeah,
comfortable, right?
one of the things
So
that
love that.
I
Great stuff.
love what you said about really taking that inventory within that 30-day period, and also asking, what I've asked myself is, what did I learn? So what you just
Mm.
is really taking a step back and evaluating, what are you learning from the experience? Is there a pattern that needs to change in terms of how you're hiring, your decisions are being made?
Dr. Bailey, I'm so glad you brought that up because I want to tell you, I don't think I've ever actually talked about this on the pod before, but I found out a pattern in myself that I had to get rid of. And so it was when you first start up a company and you're a founder, um, and people are like, want to come work for you. You're like, this is amazing. Great. Oh yeah. And then yeah, it's almost like you have to like, okay, like we're doing this type of thing, right? And I remember early on, people that desperately wanted to work with me and at our company and would just, I want to be here, so I'll do anything. I'll run through a wall. Da, da, da. Like, I think I probably like had a little bit of ego about that. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, we are pretty great here. You know what? You should come work here. You're gonna do great. And I found that there's actually no correlation behind desire and wanting to and being able to do and being that right fit. And I had to learn from that because it's, especially when you start something, it's your baby and it's like flattery. Your baby's beautiful. I want to be around your baby all the time. It's like, oh, all right. Well, why don't you babysit for me? No, not a good idea.
Great.
Right? So it's something that I had to learn. It took me a few years to realize like, what's the pattern here? It's, oh, well, they really wanted the job and they followed up and they were, so desperate to prove themselves. And that's not always a good thing. It's not always a bad thing either. I've had some people, I remember our second employee, we've been around 16 years. My second employee still works here. I remember he said, hey, if you hire me, I will promise you this. No one will outwork me. And you know what? We hired him and he was right. He's one of the hardest workers I've ever been around. So like sometimes it can be, but I think I got kind of biased in that, oh, they like me. They think I'm great. Um, and that's not a great decision making
You
matrix
know
when it
what,
comes to hiring.
Odds?
Don't have the
This is
bias
a
heavily.
full circle moment. You just gave a great example of a leader who has now achieved self-awareness.
I appreciate that. Look at that. We're learning so much in pod, out of pod, everywhere. So much great content here. So, Dr. Bailey, I got a couple more questions for you. I want to take it here. We're contractually obligated to talk about artificial intelligence in every podcast in 2026. So, I'm just interested. Is there any type of AI in your personal life you're using it and getting use out of it? Anything going on in the organization that you can share?
Yeah, I would say both. So from a personal standpoint, really, as you know, I'm curious. So I'm curious on doing different types of AI applications, really learning to hone in on having the better prompts, having AI to do things that are just rudimentary tasks that I don't need to spend any time on, and really, really training my AI, now getting into agentic AI. So that's one part on the personal. On the professional side or on the work side, we have done a couple of things that I'm very excited about. One is an AI lab that we're offering for all of our team members, which really helps them to understand maybe 3 stages of AI. First is just your basic, how to use simple prompts to get some of your work done. The second is really becoming more of a astute learner around AI and learning agentic AI and learning how AI can be instrumental in not just doing the work that we're doing, but from a strategic standpoint, what jobs can be augmented by AI so that we can repurpose people's time to do things that AI cannot do, like being at the bedside and human kindness. And then the third level there is really the activation of leveraging AI as a strategic element of our business strategy.
I love that. I use it daily. We're building AI software. We have this big AI training boot camp going on in our company right now, so we can get everybody up leveled
Yes.
and upskilled.
Mhm.
Much to your point. And I'll give you an example today. Sometimes it's so intrinsic into everything I do, but there's sometimes where, I'll give you an example. I was having a conversation today with our technical and product team, and I was trying to think through, okay, well, we really want to look at like these two like, distinct things. There's some overlap here, and it's like industry wide stuff, right? For an agency versus an internal talent acquisition organization. Who in the company can I find to go like build out this matrix and show me what's like overlap and what's not and what's unique and the Venn diagram? And I'm like, this person's super busy and this person, I don't know if they're qualified to do it. And I don't know if they have enough insight. And I'm like, what am I doing? I got Claude right here for me. I got Anthropic right here for me. Let me put in this prompt in this use case. It spit out a document that went and evaluated all the competitors in the industry and built out a matrix, knew enough about me and what we're doing to kind of make it relevant. And I got that in 3 minutes, 4 minutes. And previously I would have spent days, weeks, months trying to find the right person, and they would have had to go stop doing something else to this. And it's just great. And so, was it 100% perfect? No, right? There was some things that I needed to kind of modify and kind of make better, but it was worth the time, and it probably saved me one hundredth of the time I would have spent on somebody else's plate, just doing it
Mm.
myself and kind of getting to the same place. So, totally with you on that. It's here to stay. I think we got to adapt and embrace it. And I think for the most part, I think it's going to be a very positive thing. But we also got to make sure that with such powerful technology that we're keeping in mind all the
Yeah.
constraints and different things that come
Especially,
place. Because with anything that is extremely powerful to do good, we know what the converse of that
yes.
is. We've seen that
Yeah,
too.
we built
Um,
a internal engine, we call it Insightly, and we also are working very closely, myself, our CIO, and our chief physician executive, because it's full circle. We want to make sure that we do no harm and that we are keeping quality and safety top of mind in terms of any application of AI.
some of the best technology leaders I've met have been in the hospital and healthcare space, and just so many different things from ambient listening
Yes.
to consolidation of EMR to patient experience once they leave and like prescription. There's just so much opportunity there. If there was ever a use case for artificial intelligence, healthcare and government are probably the two biggest ones where we've got some bureaucracy and inefficiency that you'd like to think we could somehow get some benefit out of. So I'm excited to hear that you all are doing that at CommonSpirit Health. And I'm sure there's some people listening to this that it excites them to want to come work with the organization or come be at the organization because you're so at the forefront of these different things. Now let's go back a little bit old school. I like to read, and I'm a physical book reader. I don't listen to books. I don't ask Chat GPT to summarize books for me. I like to open up my physical book and I like to read it. So I'd like to ask you, Dr. Bailey, is there a book that you'd recommend for our listeners that either you read recently that you really liked, or maybe something that's really been informative for you throughout your
Mm.
career?
One book that I like to reference is Marshall Goldsmith, "What Got You Here Won't Get You There." Like
Great
that
book.
book. There's a couple of other I kind of triangulate books, as you can imagine, from the research and work that I do. But I would say that that book, I liked a lot of aspects about it because you made a comment about this before, Oz, is that, as you go in your career, you think you gain skills and capabilities and then you continue to try that, rinse and repeat, but never taking a moment to pause and figure out, all right, does this still serve me? Or how do I need to show up differently at this level? And there is a difference. And so I would say probably the first book that comes to mind that I've leveraged and helped others with is that book.
It's a great book. I've read it a couple of different times, and I'll tell you my use case around that. So, built a business, like I said, over 16 years. Started a new startup 3 years ago. We've had success. It's been great. I would say about 8 or 9 years in, kind of hit a ceiling. And a lot of my first, second, third, fourth employee all worked here. We were getting by like just by talent and scrappiness, and we've gotten to like pretty significant size. And yet, we could not break through that next
Yeah.
barrier. And a lot of that is because a lot of the things that we did as individually talented people that would just like come together and do something and get it done and move on, you can't scale that over time. And so I remember reading that, picking up that book at that time and reading it a second time. What got you here won't get you there was so informative for me because not only what got you here won't get you there, sometimes you have to completely do the opposite and reverse of the things that made you successful. And it's so counterintuitive because I did XYZ, and then you just think I keep running this playbook, and I'm like, I'm going to be
Right.
Elon Musk or whatever my definition of entrepreneurial success will be. That ain't it. You got to reinvent, you got to re-understand, and you got to change, and you got to adapt. And that has just been something that's been so informative for me. And I'm not saying I've gotten 100% right, but that book was a really, really informative
Especially when
read
you
for
think
me. And
about the
also,
pace of change, right? In the
100%. I mean, we're going through the fastest pace of change in the history of anything. And there's technology, but there's also the people aspect, and there's just so many different things going on right now that rebuilding, rethinking is a really paramount thing to do, not just on a yearly basis, right? On a monthly basis. Anyways, another book along that same line is From Good to Great.
Oh,
That's another
yes.
book I remember reading at that time. Absolutely, took me to another level in terms of how I was thinking about things. All right, last question. What is some advice that you would have given 20-year-old Alicia that you didn't know then, but that you know now?
I would say to be comfortable being my authentic self. And oftentimes I would see the model of what success would look like, of what I was aspiring to be, and
Mm.
try to curtail, model, shape, redesign. And while some of that might have been true during the time of climbing my career, the authenticity is the thing that I say I lean on the most related to my success. It gives confidence as I'm not trying to be anyone else. It's okay to be me. And so I would say that's probably what I would say. It's okay. You're going to be different. You're going to be unique. You're going to be in spaces that you're going to be the only one, but it's going to be okay. There was this interesting, it's very dated, but it's Perry the Peacock in the Land of Penguins. And I don't know if you ever saw that video,
No, I have not. That
but
sounds
well,
amazing. I think I
it's a
get the
little
gist of it.
animation, but the uniqueness of that is really about how the peacock continued to try to be a penguin, wear the suit, walk the way, but he was a peacock full of colors, and my maiden name is Perry. So I really resonated with that, and I would say my younger self is spend less time on trying to mimic or see how you can shape fit yourself into a box when you are maybe that's not the right box for you, and the authenticity will get you to where you need to be.
And what I would say is, even if the 20-year-old version of yourself was still kind of forming who that is and what your beliefs were, if you're being your authentic self, some of it might work, some of it may not, but you're going to learn faster. You're going to get to where you want to go faster, and you're going to find your people and your tribe and your community much faster. So I'm totally with you. And I think a lot of people do that early in your career. We've heard fake it till you make it, or you're emulating what you see as successful. And then we get away from our authentic selves. I can be honest, I know some 45 and 50-year-olds who still haven't figured out their authentic self. So totally love that. Great advice. Looks like things turned out okay for you. You're doing amazing work. I'm so appreciative of you coming on, Dr.
Thank you.
Bailey. Thank you again. And hope to see you soon. You're in Chicago,
I'm
right?
in Chicago most.
Okay. Well, next time, that's one of my favorite
Awesome.
cities. Next time I'm up there, we're going to go grab a bite. Oh, yeah. I love it, especially in the summer. You won't catch me there in December or January, but you see me in the summer and the fall. And I love the people. I love the food. I love the culture. Architecture is incredible.
Amazing.
Yeah, I think per capita, it's the best food city in the country. I know my New York friends are going to get mad at me for saying that, but here's what I would tell you: in New York, location matters more than anything. You could open up anything, and it's going to get foot traffic. You're going to stay in business. In Chicago, if you're not really doing it, you're probably not going to be in business very long because there's a lot of great restaurants there. And
Spot
that
on.
is my restaurant tip for the day on the podcast.
Well, thank you. I'm delighted that we had this time together.
Thank you so much for coming on.
Bye.